The Motive Force of Socialism by Igor Shafarevich. If that is the objective conclusion towards which socialism is moving, what then is its subjective aim? What inspires all these movements and gives them their strength? The picture that emerges from our deliberations has all the appearances of a contradiction. Socialist ideology, whose realization in full leads to the destruction of mankind, has for thousands of years inspired great philosophers and raised great popular movements. Why have they not been aware of the debacle that is the true end of socialism? And, if aware, why have they not recoiled from it? What error of thought, what aberration of the feelings can propel people along a path whose end is death? It seems to me that the contradiction here is not real, but only apparent, as often happens when someone makes a proposition in an argument which seems so obvious that nobody pays any attention to it, yet it is this unnoticed proposition that embodies the contradiction. In this particular argument, the obvious element seems to be the proposition that the fatal nature of socialism has never been noticed, but the closer you become acquainted with socialist philosophy, the clearer it becomes that there is no error here, no aberration. The organic connection between socialism and death is subconsciously or half-consciously felt by its followers without in the least frightening them at all. On the contrary, this is what gives the socialist movements their attraction and their motive force. This cannot, of course, be proved logically. It can be verified only by checking it against socialist literature and the psychology of socialist movements. And here we are obliged to limit ourselves to a few heterogeneous examples. If Nechayev, for instance, in calling on young people to join the revolution, also warned them that the majority of the revolutionaries will perish without a trace, that's the prospect, one of those rare prophecies that was realized in full, what attraction did he have for them? He, of all people, could not appeal to God, or to the immortal soul, or to patriotism, or even to a sense of honor, since, in order to become a good socialist, he proposed the renunciation of all feelings of kinship, friendship, love, gratitude, and even honor itself. In the proclamations issued by him and Bakunin, one can see quite clearly what it was that attracted them and infected the others: the urge for death and unbridled destruction, absolute and extraordinary. A whole generation of contemporary revolutionaries was doomed to perish in that conflagration, a generation poisoned by the most squalid living conditions, fit only to destroy and be destroyed. That was Bakunin's sole aim. Not only were positive ideals absent, it was forbidden even to think about them. We refuse point blank to work out the future conditions of life. We do not wish to deceive ourselves with the dream that we shall have enough strength left for creation. In the USSR, our generation well remembers how we marched in columns of young pioneers and sang with fervor, as did the young people in the Civil War and the Red Guards before us. Bravely shall we enter battle on behalf of Soviet power, and all together we shall die in this struggle of ours. And the greatest fervor, the greatest elan, was evoked by that phrase, all together we shall die. Or here is how three of the most famous socialist writers of the last century imagined the future of the human race. Saint Simon foresaw that mankind would perish as the result of the planet's drying up. Fourier thought the same because the Earth would stop rotating on its axis and the poles would topple down to the equator, while Engels thought it would be because the planet would cool down. These can hardly be regarded as the fruits of scholarly minds forced to bow to the truth, however drastic it might appear to be. Moreover, these three prophecies cannot all be true. Religion predicts the end of our world too, but only after the attainment of its ultimate aim, which also supplies the meaning of its history. But socialism, on the principle of the similarity of diametrical opposites, attributes the end of mankind to some external accident and thus deprives its whole history of any meaning. In the near future, the leaders of the socialist movements will look forward with surprising sang-froid, and occasionally even with open satisfaction, to the destruction, if not of all mankind, then of the greater part of it. In our time, Chairman Mao has already stated his conviction that the death of half the population of the globe would not be too high a price for the victory of socialism throughout the world. Similarly, at the beginning of the 14th century, for example, the leader of the Patarine movement in Italy, Dolcino, predicted the imminent destruction of all mankind, relying on the authority of the prophet Isaiah, and the remnant will be quite small and insignificant. There are many indications that a tendency to self-destruction is not foreign to mankind. We have the pessimistic religion of Buddhism, which postulates as the ultimate aim of mankind its fusion with the nothing, with nirvana, the philosophy of Lao Tzu, in which the ultimate aim is dissolution in non-being, the philosophical system of Hartmann, who predicted the deliberate self-destruction of mankind, the appearance at various times of scientific and philosophical trends setting out to prove that man is a machine, though their proofs are in each case completely different, and all they have in common is their totally unscientific urge to establish the fact. Finally, the fundamental role of the urge to self-destruction has long since been indicated by biology. Thus, Freud considered it, under the title of the death instinct, or thanatos, one of the two basic forces which determines man's psychic life. And socialism, which captures and subordinates millions of people to its will in a movement whose ideal aim is the death of mankind, cannot, of course, be understood without the assumption that those same ideas are equally applicable to social phenomena. That is, that among the basic forces influencing historical development is the urge to self-destruction, the human death instinct. An understanding of this urge as a force analogous to instinct also enables us to explain some specific features of socialism. The manifestations of an instinct are always connected with the sphere of the emotions. The performance of an instinctive action evokes a deep feeling of satisfaction and emotional uplift, and in man a feeling of inspiration and happiness. This can account for the attractiveness of the socialist worldview, that condition of ardor and of spiritual uplift, and that inexhaustible energy which can be met in the leaders and members of the socialist movements. These movements have the quality of infectiousness, which is typical of many instincts. Conversely, understanding the capacity for learning and for intellectual evaluation of a situation are almost incompatible with instinctual action. In man, the influence of instinct, as a rule, lowers the critical faculty. Arguments directed against the aims which the instinct is striving to achieve are not only not examined, but are seen as base and contemptible. All these features are found in the socialist worldview. At the beginning of this essay, we pointed out that socialism, as it were, repels rational consideration. It has often been remarked that to reveal contradictions in socialist teachings in no way reduces their attractive force, and socialist ideologists are not in the least scared of contradictions. Only in the context of socialism, for instance, could there arise, in the 19th century, and we find numerous followers, such a doctrine as Fourier's, in which a basic role is played by the notion of the sexual life of the planets. The North Pole of the Earth, bearer of male fluid, unites with the South Pole, bearer of the female fluid. Fourier predicted that in the future, socialist system of water and of the seas and oceans would acquire the taste of lemonade, and that the present creatures of the sea would be replaced by anti-whales and anti-sharks, which would convey cargoes from one continent to another at colossal speed. Footnote: as Ingalls said, here, purely Gallic wit combines with great depth of analysis. End of footnote. This will seem less surprising, however, if we recall that it is only just over 200 years since socialist ideology assumed a rational exterior, and it was very recently, on the macro-historical timescale, that socialism, in the form of Marxism, exchanged this exterior for a scientific one. The brief period of scientific socialism is ending before our eyes. The scientific wrappings no longer increases the attraction of socialist ideas, and socialism is casting it off. Thus, Herbert Marcuse, in The End of Utopia, says that for the modern avant-garde left, Fourier is more relevant than Marx, precisely because of his greater utopianism. He calls for the replacement of the development of socialism from utopia to science by its development from science to utopia. All this shows that the force which manifests itself in socialism does not act through reason, but resembles an instinct. This accounts for the inability of socialist ideology to react to the results of experience, or, as behaviorists would say, its inability to learn. A spider spinning its web will complete all the 6,400 movements necessary, even if its glands have dried up in the heat and will produce no silk. How much more dramatic is the example of the socialists, with the same automatism constructing for the nth time their recipe for a society of equality and justice. It would seem that for them the numerous and varied precedents, which have always led to one and the same result, do not exist. The experience of many thousands of years is rejected and replaced by clichés from the realm of the irrational, such as the claim that all the different socialisms of today and yesterday were created in a different part of the globe, were not the real thing, and that, in the special conditions of our socialism, everything will be different, and so on and so forth. That is the explanation for the longevity of that mass of prejudices and catchphrases surrounding socialism, like the identification of socialism with social justice, or the belief in its scientific character. They are accepted without the least verifications, and take root in people's minds, like absolute truths. At our present turning point, the depth and complexity of the problem facing mankind is becoming increasingly apparent. Mankind is being opposed by a powerful force which threatens its very existence, and at the same time paralyzes its most reliable tool, reason.